Ever wonder what happens when power meets prejudice on an empty stretch of highway? That's the question that sets the scene before anything even moves. The asphalt shimmered under a late afternoon sun somewhere outside Richmond, Virginia, when a black SUV rolled steady and calm between the white lines. Inside, Colonel Alicia Monroe 43, decorated and battle-tested, tapped her steering wheel in time with the faint hum of a jazz station. You could almost smell the sand from her last deployment still clinging to her uniform bag in the back seat, the faint memory of foreign wind against desert armor. Before we even get to her next mission, here's mine. If you're hearing this, watching this, or feeling that twinge in your chest that says, "This could be me," hit that subscribe button and stay with the story, because what happens next will shake what you think. You know about rank, race, and respect. The cruiser appeared behind her like a ghost in the mirror. Blue lights flashed, slicing through the golden haze. Alicia slowed, signaling, pulling onto the gravel shoulder as protocol demanded. Her hands moved with the discipline of years in command engine off, window down, both palms visible on the wheel. The officer who stepped out wasn't the calm voice type. His name tag read Harkins, but the arrogance carried a louder signature than his badge. He approached, hand resting casually close to his weapon, mirrored sunglasses hiding eyes that already judged the woman before him. "License and registration," he barked, voice coated in authority that didn't come from law but from habit. Alicia met his tone with measured stillness. "Of course, officer," she said, moving slowly, deliberately. But even deliberate wasn't enough to dissolve the tension curling in the air. Harkins saw the pressed civilian jacket, the neat bun, but not the years of medals she'd earned, not the leadership that had sent entire units home alive. To him, she was just another black woman in a high-end car that didn't fit his image of belonging. He leaned closer, sniffing suspicion like fuel. "Where are you headed in such a hurry?" he asked, though she hadn't been speeding. "Base," she said, voice level. "Fort Garrison." He smirked. "You military?" "Yes," she answered. "Active." The smirk widened. "Got any proof of that, ma'am?" He made the word sound like mockery. Alicia opened her wallet, revealing her Department of Defense ID. His jaw twitched, but he didn't hand it back. Instead, he called in the plate number, taking his time. Every second stretched like wire pulled tight. Passing cars slowed. Some stared. One teenager held up a phone. Alicia sat motionless, the jazz gone now, replaced by the pounding of her pulse. In her head flickered every briefing she'd ever given about calm de-escalation, every time she'd told younger soldiers not to let anger lead. Yet even discipline had limits when disrespect reached into your name. When Harkins returned, backup lights flashed from a second cruiser. Two more officers joined, one older, one new. The older officer, Lieutenant Reeves, carried a heavier silence, the kind of man who'd seen too much and said too little. "Problem?" Reeves asked. "Routine stop," Harkins replied, voice tight. "Possible stolen vehicle." Reeves glanced at the SUV, then at Alicia. "You run her license?" "Working on it," Harkins muttered, though he'd already done so. Reeves frowned, sensing something off. Alicia watched, aware that even the second man's hesitation might not protect her. Inside her mind, memories snapped into place nights overseas. The sound of helicopters, a soldier under her command who'd once said, "Ma'am, you never flinch." She didn't now either, even when Harkins ordered her out of the vehicle. "Step out, ma'am." The way he said it carried no courtesy. She complied. "Hands where I can see 'em. They've been there since you stopped me," she said softly. He ignored her tone. "Walk to the back." She did. Dust rose under her boots, swirling in the dying sunlight. Her reflection in the SUV's glossy paint caught her own steady gaze calm, unbroken. Reeves finally intervened. "Harkins, that's enough," he said quietly. But the younger man's pride was already fueled. "Sir, I'm conducting an investigation." "Of what?" "Possible possession. She's acting nervous." Reeves raised an eyebrow. "She's acting trained." Alicia nearly smiled at that, but she kept her composure. "Officer," she said, "if you'll allow me, I can provide documentation confirming." I'll tell you when to speak, Harkins snapped. The line between authority and abuse blurred in the heat. Reeves exhaled, muttering something under his breath about rookies with egos. Then came the moment everything tilted. Harkins demanded she pop the trunk. Alicia hesitated. There's classified gear in there, she explained. Not for civilian inspection. That only made him more suspicious. Step back, he ordered, hand now on his sidearm. Step back now. The younger officer flinched at the sight. Reeves took a step forward. Put that hand down, officer, he commanded. But Harkins's pride burned hotter than reason. He opened the trunk and froze. Inside lay a neatly packed military duffel, a folded uniform with a name tag embroidered Call, Alicia Monroe, and a stack of commendation plaques. The older officer's jaw slackened. Colonel? The word sliced the air. Harkins blinked, color draining. You're a colonel? Yes, she said simply, voice quiet but laced with steel. Reeves immediately straightened, saluting instinctively. Ma'am, he said, forgive the misunderstanding. Alicia studied Harkins, whose hand trembled slightly now. You profiled me, she said, not with anger but with clarity. You saw color before rank. He swallowed, the weight of his mistake pressing down. The teenager with the phone still recorded, and the world beyond that lens waited to judge the uniform that had just disgraced itself. But Alicia wasn't interested in revenge. She'd seen men die for less arrogance. She'd seen forgiveness save lives. You'll learn from this, she said softly. Or the world will teach you harder, Reeves nodded, taking control, telling the others to stand down. Harkins mumbled an apology that fell flat against the gravel. Alicia retrieved her ID, closing the trunk herself. As she drove off, the horizon bled into twilight, a long road stretching toward the base, and the beginning of something larger. Because one incident never stays small when truth meets a camera lens. By the time she reached Fort Garrison, her phone buzzed nonstop messages from colleagues, superiors, even reporters. The video had gone viral before she parked. The caption read, Colonel Monroe profiled during traffic stop. Comments flooded in outrage, praise, arguments. She shut the screen off. She'd faced battles bigger than hashtags, but this one would test the Army's own reflection. That night, in her office, a call from the Pentagon came through. Colonel Monroe, this is General Harland, the deep voice said. We saw the footage. We need you in D.C. tomorrow. This incident, well, it's going to be public. Alicia looked out her window at the quiet parade grounds, the flag whispering in the night. Understood, sir, she replied. Permission to speak freely? Granted. Then let's make it count for more than a headline. The next morning, uniform pressed, medals aligned, she entered the Pentagon conference room. Cameras lined the back wall. Across the table sat policy advisors, civil rights officers, and 2 men from internal affairs. Harkins's name surfaced again, suspended pending investigation. Colonel Monroe, the moderator began, you're under no obligation to participate publicly, but your voice carries weight. She nodded. Then let's use it. And she spoke about leadership, bias, integrity, the same discipline that had carried her through war zones now guided her words. Through the battlefield of perception, she wasn't speaking just to defend herself. She was building a bridge between those who wore the uniform and those who feared it. Reeves later reached out privately, his message simple. You reminded me why we salute. It wasn't praise she sought, but progress. Yet outside, the storm brewed larger. News outlets debated motives. Social media split between outrage and denial. And somewhere in a quiet suburban home, Officer Harkins sat staring at the screen, replaying his own mistake. His wife's voice cracked the silence. That's you, isn't it? He nodded, shame settling heavier than the badge he'd once polished with pride. And so the ripple began not of anger, but of reckoning. By the next morning, the sun rose over Washington, D.C., like a flare of gold on polished marble, and Alicia Monroe's name had traveled farther than she ever imagined. What had begun as a silent act of discipline on a rural highway had become a national conversation. Commentators debated professionalism. Citizens debated prejudice. And within the halls of the Defense Department, there was quiet unease because Alicia wasn't just any officer. She was a strategist, a mentor, a woman whose service record was spotless. When she walked into the press room that day, every flash of a camera felt like a test. She didn't hide behind statements written by others. Instead, she spoke from memory, from experience, her voice steady. I have served this nation in uniform for over 20 years. The uniform doesn't erase who I am. It defines what I stand for. Respect must go both ways. Those words rippled through the air like command cadence. Even those who had come to find controversy left hearing conviction. Elsewhere, Officer Daniel Harkins sat on his porch, the morning light dull against his unshaven face. The department had placed him on leave pending review, and silence filled the space where routine used to live. He wasn't a cartoon villain, just a man raised on unchecked assumptions. The video had forced him to watch himself from the outside, and that reflection burned worse than any reprimand. His phone buzzed with messages from colleagues, some sympathetic, some condemning. His young daughter had asked the night before, "Daddy, why were people angry at you on the TV?" And he had no answer that felt right. Shame is a quiet tutor, and in that quiet he began to realize that apology wasn't about saving his career, it was about confronting the part of himself that never questioned power. Alicia returned to base to find a flood of letters and emails, some hateful, many grateful. One message stood out. "You reminded my son that dignity isn't weakness." She read it twice, then deleted it, not out of disregard, but because she needed space to think beyond applause. The Army's ethics board contacted her for an internal review. She welcomed it. "Let it all be on record," she told General Harland. "The only way forward is through transparency," Harland agreed, though he warned, "You're stepping into politics now, Colonel. It's not like the battlefield." She smiled faintly. "Neither was the highway, sir." Weeks passed. Investigators interviewed everyone involved, reviewed footage, cross-checked procedures. The findings were clear. Harkins had violated multiple departmental codes of conduct. Yet Alicia, when asked for a statement regarding disciplinary recommendations, surprised everyone. "He needs training and accountability, not destruction," she said. "You can't rebuild trust by burning another bridge." Her words carried into the report verbatim. When the hearing concluded, Harkins was reassigned, not fired, to a mandatory civil relations program sponsored jointly by the Justice Department and the military. The program paired officers with veterans to learn cultural intelligence and crisis management. Alicia was asked to serve as guest instructor. She hesitated, then agreed. If growth was possible, she wanted to see it happen. Their reunion months later was tense, sterile, in a government training room lined with motivational posters. Harkins walked in wearing plain clothes, stripped of badge authority, carrying only a notebook. Alicia stood at the front, uniform crisp, posture impeccable. For a moment he thought she might refuse to look at him, but she met his eyes directly. "Mr. Harkins," she said. "Colonel Monroe," he answered. The class settled into silence. She began teaching case studies, how unconscious bias affects decision-making, how adrenaline narrows judgment, how every encounter can either escalate or heal. Her voice never rose, it resonated. During a break, he approached quietly. "Colonel, I wanted to say I'm sorry. Not just for what I did, but for what I believed about people I never knew." She studied him, weighing sincerity. "Then prove it," she said. "Not to the next person you meet on the road." That night, after class, she sat in her quarters writing notes for a leadership seminar when her phone buzzed again, this time from the Defense Secretary's office. They wanted her to join a new task force on ethical reform within interagency training. It meant long hours, more public exposure, and scrutiny from both sides of the aisle. She accepted anyway, knowing every reform starts with fatigue. Across town, Harkins began volunteering at a community center, helping returning veterans transition to civilian life. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was learning empathy from the very group he had once underestimated. When reporters asked why, he said, "Because ignorance isn't permanent unless you protect it." Months rolled into a year. The national conversation cooled but didn't vanish. Policy changes took shape. New de-escalation modules, mandatory cultural briefings, peer review systems for stops involving potential bias. Each improvement bore traces of Alicia's input. During a Pentagon ceremony, she received a commendation for exemplary leadership and public integrity. The applause was polite, the cameras respectful. Yet, as she accepted the medal, she thought not of glory, but of that lonely stretch of Virginia road and the silence that had tested her composure. She realized that moment had been less about humiliation and more about choosing who she wanted to be when dignity was challenged. Meanwhile, Harkins's department invited her to speak at their annual ethics summit, a gesture few expected. Some warned her not to go, calling it political theater. She went anyway. Standing at the podium in front of hundreds of officers, she began with no script, just presence. Every profession has its mirror, she said. We don't get to choose when the world holds it up. We only choose how honestly we look into it. She told them about mistakes, about silence, about how authority without humility corrodes purpose. When she finished, the room was quiet. Then applause started slow, unsure, then swelling. Harkins, seated in the second row, stood with the rest, tears hiding behind a small, grateful smile. Later, as she left the building, he caught up to her outside. "Colonel," he said softly, "you didn't have to do any of this." "Neither did you," she replied. "But we both did something better, we learned." They shook hands, not as adversaries, but as two people who had traveled through their own storms and come out seeing clearer. In that handshake lay something the cameras couldn't capture: growth, redemption, and the quiet possibility that the next encounter on some highway might end with understanding instead of fear. That night, she returned to her quarters and opened her laptop to a flood of messages again, this time from young recruits who had watched the summit online. "You made me want to serve better. You made me believe the system can change." She smiled faintly, typed back one sentence. "Change always starts with one decision." Then she closed the computer, stepped out onto the balcony, and looked at the city lights. The same country she'd sworn to defend was still flawed, still learning, but so was she, and maybe that was enough. And somewhere on another quiet road, a patrol car slowed behind a stalled vehicle. Officer Harkins stepped out, now calm, deliberate, voice steady but kind. "Ma'am, you all right?" he asked. The woman nodded, surprised. "Just a flat tire. Let me help," he said, rolling up his sleeves. No cameras, no spotlight, just a man doing his job differently this time. That small, ordinary moment was the true ending to a story that had begun with suspicion and ended with empathy.